Hey guys, so now that Livesight, Livescope, active target, whatever forward-facing imaging sonar you may have on your boat or maybe thinking about getting on your boat is all the rage, everybody does videos on, how they catch fish with Livesight or forward-facing sonar. But I wanted to talk about how effective are these units in tidal river situations. And I'm going to give you some on the water look at what you're actually looking at in a river and some perspective about how tidal rivers or even flowing rivers are going to be much, much different than lakes and reservoirs with forward-facing sonar. So let's take a look at what some of this stuff is that you see on tidal rivers. So here's the problem with tidal rivers. When you're looking at your Livescope, look at all the life. There's mud shad, white perch, crappie, yellow perch, catfish, everything else in the world swimming around. You swing this around, there, look, more of them everywhere. Swing it around some more, there's more of them everywhere. So when you're in a tidal water situation and you're looking at your Livesight, unlike a lot of lakes and reservoirs, the amount of life in a river is 20, 30 times as great as it is in these lakes and reservoirs. So you get out here with your Livesight and you see all this stuff. What are you pinpointing? What are you pinpointing? I mean, there's really nothing to pinpoint. So you're out here in these open water areas, and now there's some blowdown trees and stuff around that you can see, and there's some stuff on the bottom. That's like a log on the bottom right there with a couple fish around it. You might throw to something like that. But it becomes, in these rivers, an overwhelming task to try to pinpoint the bass, right? Swing it around again. Well, there's another big wad of fish. Mud shad, more than likely. That big dark image, or that big image on the right, is a log or the end of a tree or something like that. And it's got some fish hanging around it. More than likely, that's a school of crappie. That's a school of crappie. That's not bass. The bass in these rivers are going to be very isolated. So that's a log there. That's not fish. So that may be a fish on top of that log right there. That may be one. But that's just a big log is all that is. So my point is, Livesight is a great tool. But when you get into these tidal rivers, it becomes a much better tool if you use it to locate structure than it does if you use it to try to locate fish. Because if you're trying to use it to locate fish, that's all you're going to see. You understand? This is going to be what I just showed you on my screen there. For the next 5 miles down the river, in the upper end of this river, it's going to look exactly like that. In some areas even worse, where there'll be 10,000 mud shad up here. When I say mud shad, a lot of you think of them as gizzard shad. They're big 12 to 14 inch long shad that get up that start to really congregate up in the headwater of these rivers once it starts to cool down. So what I do a lot of times with Livescope or Livesight or forward-facing sonar on these rivers is you almost have to ignore the fish, and sometimes I'll put my forward-facing sonar on perspective mode to get a better picture of the logs and the brush piles and things like that I know the bass are actually going to be living around. So this is what we deal with in a tidal river situation. So let's talk about what are you actually seeing on the Livescope. What we're seeing right here, that's a tree. See the horizontal and then the branch coming down? That's a tree. That's not fish. Nothing's moving. You know, there's a few fish moving off to the left of it, but that big bulk of that thing you're looking at right there, that's a tree in the water. So let's swing it around slowly. See there, you can see it even more with a big straight return with the branches coming off the bottom towards the bottom. So that's a tree. That's not fish, but that's something in a tidal river that you'd want to probably throw to, even though you may not even see fish on it, because those bass are going to get down really tight around that tree and just sit there. They're not going to move, and they're going to be hard to locate. So here we look on the left and we see the end branches on the tree. And then what are those right there swimming? More than likely, that's a small school of crappie swimming around right there, going off to the left side of your screen right now. That's crappie, suspended, round dots, grouped up in like a ball type thing. So here what you're looking at, that's mud shad. See how they're spread out top to bottom, bigger marks, great big ones. I mean, that's mud shad. They get up in these upper ends of these rivers in the fall and the winter by the millions. So now you know what you're looking at. That's a big waste of time trying to fish through that. So if you're in these rivers, these tidal rivers, and you got your forward facing sonar on, like I said, you're going to see gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of schools of fish, and you'll see some singles too. The singles are more likely the bass than the groups of fish in these rivers, but what I've learned in a couple years that I've owned forward facing sonar is, if those fish are moving and you throw to them, your chance of catching them is about 0.5%, maybe. They're just not biting. The ones that are moving are not biting. So in a tidal river situation, forward facing sonar is best used to locate objects that the fish sit on, because a feeding bass in a tidal river is almost never going to be out in the open somewhere, almost never going to be out in the middle of the current, almost never going to be out where these schools of crappie and mud shad. Almost never. They might be out there resting or dormant, but when these fish go on a feed, they're going to get next to something every single time. So you're better off in a tidal river with Livesight or forward facing sonar, using it to locate underwater objects that you can't see with your eyes. Now that we know that in a tidal river situation, actively targeting single fish, I'm not going to say it's impossible. I've done it. I've caught some fish doing it, but it's not probably the best technique most of the time in a tidal river. There's just too many fish swimming around in a tidal river to try to pinpoint that bass. Now, a lot of times if you see a single, blip, and he's sitting there, just sitting there, or maybe two, and they're just sitting there and it's a little larger than a lot of the other ones that you see, then those fish are catchable. But the best technique for Livesight, Livescope, forward-facing imaging in a tidal river is, like I said previously, it is to actually target the structure that you can see. And I didn't flip the transducer in this video to perspective view. In perspective view, only time I use perspective view is less than 10 feet of water. It doesn't work very good over 10 foot. It's just too deep for it to work properly. And so when I would use a perspective view in a tidal river situation, it would be when the fish are shallow. I'm looking for isolated logs, and there becomes no question about what you're looking at when you put it in perspective view, versus when it's in regular view, all you see is a fuzzy object, and if it's not off of the bottom, it's hard to distinguish it sometimes. But in perspective view, you can actually see that log that's laid on the bottom, or that rock that's laid on the bottom, or old bulkheads and things. I've seen tires and everything else in the world with perspective view. But in perspective view, you're not going to see, you know, those groups of fish or those fish. You'll see if they're moving in perspective view, you can actually see the shadow of the fish moving. So it's not best for like finding fish, but for finding structure. But again, in a tidal river situation, that's what you want to target anyhow. Because, you know, a feeding bass in a river situation is never going to be out there roaming around out in open water. He's not going to do it. A feeding bass in a river situation is going to set up on some type of structure, whether it be a bottom contour or a brush pile or a log or an edge or a dock piling or whatever it is. He's going to set up on some type of structure. So if you're thrown to the same structure that everybody else is thrown to, the stuff that you can see with your eyes, you know, maybe you're a better caster, you know, than some other people, and you can catch more fish, or you're keyed in on what they're doing and you can catch more fish. But if you can target this underwater structure that other people aren't seeing with their eyes with your forward-facing sonar, then that's what you need to do in a tidal river situation. Again, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'll please ask you to please subscribe. It'll make you a better fisherman. Share my videos, hit the little like button on the bottom. And again, I thank you for watching and have a blessed day.